And again, we know that the current leader Emmanuel Macron and has been facing brick walls one after another, especially for the people in the midst of the whole pandemic. Now, this is something that I read this morning, and I want to read it to you and want to get your reaction. It says 5 years ago, and I quote, French President Emmanuel Macron was elected on the promise of revitalizing the European Union with new vigor and vision. Arriving at his victory rally with the EU anthem playing and the EU flags flying behind him, he pledged to defend Europe and protect its civilization. Now, Professor Mark, from your perspective, we know that the first round of the votes, the results came out, and between the two candidates, they were so tight, it was so close, and Macron still took the lead. But given the fact, the condition that he has not been performing well, so in other words, people in France have been holding protests and rallies towards a current leader for months, even for years. How do we believe that this is the right person or will continue to shoulder the responsibilities for the country of France?
Yeah, there's a certain amount of irony here because Macron came into office as sort of the anti-politics candidate. He really wanted to define himself as not being on the traditional left to right spectrum, that the traditional parties, including the socialists and the conservatives, were just simply not representing modern France. And as soon as he took office, he had to deal with a variety of economic, social challenges, not only COVID, but the fact that you have serious economic problems, including inequality, which has started to create a great deal of frustration among many parts of the French public. And the situation that we're seeing now is that the political center within France is almost completely vanished. That we are seeing a great deal of support, not only for Macron, who still styles himself as a person of the people rather than as a political figure, but also a considerable amount of additional support for the left. The left candidate came very close to actually becoming the second candidate to make it to the runoff, or the far right under Marine Le Pen. So we are really seeing a great deal of polarization within the French public right now. The other problem is that the situation in Europe as a whole has also become much more difficult now with Brexit, with a lot of concerns about Hungary, about Poland, about the problem that we are seeing a lot of stresses within the European Union, exacerbated by the pandemic, exacerbated by a lot of global uncertainty right now. It is very difficult for any European candidate to be able to maintain support under these kinds of conditions.
Well, but the people or the leaders such as Emmanuel Macron or even Boris Johnson, we have seen or we have read a lot more leaders from the European side when they are dealing with international crisis, such as Ukraine and Russia. The countries actually opened up their borders to welcome those people or those refugees coming to the country. Isn't that a sign of positivity, or isn't that what the leader is supposed to show? We show integrity and we show careness, we show compassion to the refugees. Doesn't that add to the value to Macron or to someone as Macron? But so in other words, if he is actually someone that we describe, generally care about human rights and generally care about, the international community, why is he still facing a criticism domestically and internationally?
I would say a few points. You're right in the sense that, yes, Macron really tried to rework French politics to say, okay, there is a new generation, there's a new mode of thinking, and there's going to be kind of new concepts, if you will, of French politics going forward. But the fact is, you look at the history of French politics, incumbents always have a very difficult time, especially if there are significant economic challenges. There was some discussion when the Ukraine conflict began and when the refugee crisis began that France would be in a very significant position to assist. And Macron did try to act as a mediator during the first few weeks of the crisis. The problem, though, is in many ways during the campaign, he became almost too complacent. He held exactly one rally. He really did not feel that Marine Le Pen was that much of a challenger. The idea was that because of her previous association with Vladimir Putin, that would essentially end her campaign. So there was a great deal of complacency. But as the saying goes, a week is a long time in politics, and Macron found that out the hard way. It is going to be now a challenge, even though there has been a great deal more unity in Europe and within various political quarters about how to stand up to Russia, how to deal with Ukraine. But there's also going to be a considerable amount of economic pressure on France, like its neighbors, because of the fact that Russia is now being placed under sanctions, and that's going to have a significant hit on the European economy as a whole. So how Macron will be able to continue to define himself as a person of the people, not of the establishment, that has gotten a lot more difficult now, especially now that a lot of time has passed.
Professor Mark, I want to talk about the relationship between China and France under Macron at this moment. So again, we know that Macron is facing this new election, and the next candidate is running so close, rather competitively with Macron. Now, from your perspective, how would you evaluate, or how would you diagnose the relationship between China and France under Emmanuel Macron in the past few years?
Okay, well, under Macron and similar to previous French governments, we see the same kind of balancing act that I can point to both South Korea, to Germany, to others, trying to maintain obviously very strong commitments to the West, to the United States, but recognizing the fact that China is a very significant economic pole and that trade with China simply cannot be dismissed. Now, what has been happening over the past year, though, has definitely caused a bit of a shakeup of French policy in the Asia-Pacific as a whole. The development of the AUKUS Pact and the fact that France was left out, and the fact that France had a very difficult time with Australia as a result of AUKUS, may have created a bit of a concern that, okay, where is France's role in the Asia-Pacific going to be? Because, again, France would very much like to maintain good relations with China economically, but it's also under a great deal of pressure from the United States to show the flag, to stand up to China, to say that we are not going to support Chinese expansionism, including, for example, in the South China Sea. So it's been a balancing act. And if we are going to be seeing a period of economic uncertainty for the next little while, maintaining all of those links is going to be very crucial. So I think there is going to be a considerable rethinking after the election process is over as to where China and East Asia is going to fit within France's foreign policy priorities.
You know, Professor Mark, I want to end our conversation with the last question. We started the whole discussion with the country of North Korea, and then we talk about the South Korean election, and we talk about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, and we get in China into the loop, and eventually we talk about this ongoing election, a presidential election in France. Putting everything together, Professor Mark, from your perspective, again, we're just stepping into nearly the 4 months of 2022, and we still have a long way to go until the end of the year. But it looks like the whole world is not even ready for any major conflict yet. But naturally, it's already started a long time ago. So from your perspective, how do you think that we should understand the leadership today under such pandemic or under such globalization? Because every single person who is running for election or re-election is gotta be asked or gotta face this scrutiny under this globalization, you know, such as democracy, human rights, and, you know, fairness or inequality, etc. From your view, how do you think we should understand the word leadership today?
Excellent question. And if I was going to answer it in 2 words, I would say assume nothing. It has been shown over the past 2-3 years that a lot of preconceived ideas about leadership domestically and internationally, about how the international system works economically, strategically, politically, a lot of these ideas have been challenged directly. And every leader coming in now has to understand that we are dealing with a very significant shift in how these ideas are playing themselves out. Talking about globalization, it's been very easy for some pundits to say, well, we're seeing the end of globalization, but it's not quite that simple. We have seen many examples of how the global supply chain has vulnerabilities, and they simply cannot be ignored or dealt with in an overnight type situation. We have seen many examples of how preconceived ideas about multilateralism and cooperation simply cannot be taken for granted. And for all the discussion about, well, it's very easy to simply cut Russia out of the global economy in the way of sanctions and various other pressures, we are going to be seeing the results of that. If you are looking at energy, if you are looking at various types of trade, it simply cannot be done without any kind of significant aftershocks to the rest of the world. So any new leader coming in will have to understand that we are dealing with a situation where a lot of the rules are not applying anymore. And the ability to adjust to these new realities very quickly, I think, is going to be a very important component for any leaders in the near future.
Now, one more question, Professor Mark, before letting you go. Do you think that the world today, now after seeing everything, or after going through everything today, for the country of the United States, is it ready to invite a person like Donald Trump back to the political stage?
It's an excellent question. First of all, I think it's safe to say that Donald Trump is certainly not finished with politics in general. There's still a lot of discussion that he might run again. There has been a lot of debate about how many of these international situations that we've been talking about, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how to deal with China and with North Korea, would be affected if we see either Trump or a Trumpist presidential candidate come to power. And this is something which is going to have to be addressed very soon. The midterm elections are coming up. We could be seeing a shift in who takes the Senate and who takes the House. We could be seeing a lot more obstructionism. And we could be seeing a considerable shift in how the United States, which has been trying to reintroduce itself to global affairs, it is understandable that all of that may go into reverse in 2 years. So I think it is definitely something that is on the minds of many leaders, including here in Europe and I'd say in other parts of the world as well.
You know, Professor Mark, I think at the end of the day, I agree with what you just said. You know, for any upcoming leaders or new leaders for any other countries, just 2 words: assume nothing. Well, Professor Mark teaches in political science and including international relations, comparative politics, and his current research interests include China, such as domestic and international politics, and East Asia countries include Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, Pacific Islands. Again, Professor Mark, it's always been a pleasure of speaking with you, and thank you so much for taking your time to join our show and answer all these questions. And again, I wish we have all the time of the year, because that such conversation would never end. Again, thank you, Professor Mark, for